Hello everyone and welcome to Smart World with CNBC. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue dans Smart World avec CNBC, votre émission 100% bilingue en anglais et en français. We are together to have an overview of the greatest business moments of CNBC. At the top of this program, levée de fonds extraordinaire pour le camp Biden en août, la sortie du film Mulan non pas au cinéma mais sur une plateforme de streaming et une édition spéciale Covid-19 dans la deuxième partie de ce journal. C'est parti, let's go! Record de levée de fonds pour Biden, $364.5 million in August. That's the amount Joe Biden campaign received in fundraising in August. On décrypte avec CNBC.
Joe Biden and the Democratic National Committee raised about $364 million in August. And really what that means for Biden and Democrats is that it's going to give them enough resources to compete against Donald Trump and the Republican National Committee after they've amassed a war chest that's helped them over the last few years, since at least 2016. And so Biden and the Democrats have had to find a way to compete. And it looks like they're right there with Trump and the Republicans, because it comes at a time when you're about 60 days away from facing Trump in the general election, just a few weeks away from a major debate against the president. So this will give him enough resources, at least for the next month or two, to really push the president on air and online. And I think that's going to be key going forward. The $364 million number is a historic number. Let's just be clear about that right off the bat. Basically, the way we look at it is it's more than what Donald Trump raised in August of 2016, similar time period. It's more than what Hillary Clinton raised in 2016 when she was facing Trump for the Democratic nomination. It's a big number. It's probably the biggest fundraising month that any candidate for president has ever had. That is how big that number is. And that is how important it is to Joe Biden. But to be clear, Biden in his campaign has said a large amount of this money came from grassroots donors, that he says that the average donation was about $40 over the course of this month. And I think that what's key here is it's going to be fascinating to see who the big money donors are when it is announced. And we should know the next month or two who gave this month, how much, and what people from which part of the business industry are supporting Biden this past month. And we won't know that for a month or so, but that's going to be key as well to see who's getting in his corner in the final 60 days or so of the election. Joe Biden is not going to do a lot of in-person campaigning. You're not going to see this money go toward canvassing or setting up events for in-person events. Most of it is going to go toward, most likely at least, TV and digital ads, as well as different digital forms of outreach, however that may be, through email chains and whatever means they can connect with voters. But the bottom line is it's not going to be going toward in-person things at all due to the coronavirus pandemic.
Selon les sources officielles de la campagne, plus de 205 millions de dollars du montant d'août proviennent de dons en ligne. La campagne a attiré 1,5 million de nouveaux donateurs en août, totalisant plus de 4 millions de donateurs individuels. And Biden rips Trump over reported war debt comments. Joe Biden réprime Donald Trump. Le président est accusé d'avoir dénigré à plusieurs reprises les vétérans auprès de ses collaborateurs. Joe Biden, whose late son, Beau Biden, served in Iraq, slammed the president's comments.
Before I begin, I want to speak a little bit to what they talked about and the revelations about President Trump's disregard for our military and our veterans. Quite frankly, if what is written in the Atlantic is true, it's disgusting, and it affirms what most of us believe to be true, that Donald Trump is not fit to be the job of president, to be the commander-in-chief. The president reportedly said, and I emphasize reportedly said, that those who sign up to serve instead of doing something more lucrative are suckers. Let me be real clear. When my son was an assistant U.S. attorney and he volunteered to go to Kosovo while the war was going on as a civilian, he wasn't a sucker. When my son volunteered and joined the United States military as the Attorney General and went to Iraq for a year, won the Bronze Star and other commendations, he wasn't a sucker. The servicemen and women he served with, particularly those who did not come home, were not losers. If these statements are true, the President should humbly apologize to every Gold Star mother and father and every Blue Star family that he's denigrated and insulted. Who the heck does he think he is? Is it true? Well, we've heard from his own mouth his characterizations of an American hero, John McCain, as a loser in 2015. Donald Trump said he was not a war hero. I like people who weren't captured. Well, good for him. And his dismissal of the traumatic brain injury suffered by troops serving in Iraq as mere headaches not too long ago. He stood by, failing to take action or even raise the issue with Vladimir Putin, while the Kremlin puts bounties on the heads of American troops in Afghanistan. It's a sacred duty. And you're tired of hearing me say this. Those who've been covering me for years know. I get in trouble for saying, but I'm going to say it again. We have many obligations as a government. We only have one truly sacred obligation. Equip and support those who we send into harm's way, care for their families while they're gone, and care for them when they are home. That's the only truly sacred obligation a government has.
Lorsque mon fils s'est porté volontaire et a rejoint l'armée américaine et est allé en Irak pendant 1 an, a remporté l'étoile de bronze et d'autres décorations, il n'était pas un faible, dit Joe Biden. Trump a nié avec véhémence et à plusieurs reprises les informations publiées dans le journal The Atlantic. Il qualifie l'article, je cite, de fausses histoires avec de fausses informations. Team Biden eyes $1 trillion January stimulus. Si Joe Biden remporte la présidence, il voudrait mettre en place un plan de relance de secours d'1 milliard de dollars en janvier. Les négociations au Congrès sont pour l'instant au point mort. On fait le point avec l'ancien conseiller économique de Joe Biden.
So Axios earlier this week reported that the Biden camp is looking at $1 trillion in stimulus right out the gate in January if he is elected. Why is that justified, and do today's jobs numbers make you rethink that?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't confirm that number. I think that's going to have to be a time-sensitive kind of decision based on economic conditions if Biden is lucky, if America, in my opinion, is lucky enough for Biden to win the election. But yes, I'm almost certain that there'll need to be another fiscal package because we will be far from full employment in January, no matter what happens between now and then. We saw definitely a worthy decline in the unemployment rate today from 10.2 to 8.4%. But we also saw a shift from more people into permanent and long-term unemployment. That's problematic. We also saw, and I think this may be even more important, a deceleration in the pace of job gains. In May and June, we were adding 4 million jobs per month. In July and August, I'm talking private sector, it's about 1.3 million. So a downshifting of about 2/3 in the pace of job gains.
So if we stay at this rate, though, where we're at currently, even acknowledging that it has slowed in recent months, we would still have lost a net, call it 7-8 million jobs by the time you would expect the vice president to take office if he were elected. But he has made no secret about wanting to raise taxes on Americans who make more than $400,000 and remove a slew of what he believes are loopholes. But don't you think that raising taxes at a time so tenuous in the economic cycle would have a detrimental effect? How would that work?
Well, I don't think that you can assume that to be the case, the detrimental effect, when you're talking about people who are not liquidity constrained, so people with over 400,000. And if you look at his capital gains proposal to raise taxes on capital gains, that doesn't kick in until over $1 million. So we're not talking about people who are necessarily going to cut back spending. That said, I do think it's important to be wary of the timing when you're talking about the kinds of pay-for agendas that Vice President Biden is very committed to. He has a recovery agenda. which really helps to kind of get back to this business of building a fiscal bridge to the other side of the crisis, something that Congress, Senate Republicans in particular, have dropped the ball on. But he also has this permanent Building Back Better agenda, investment in clean energy, in childcare, in helping to promote racial equity, in manufacturing jobs, and onshoring jobs that have been lost. That's a more permanent agenda, and that will require pay for us.
Ce plan de relance d'urgence serait juste pour gagner suffisamment de temps pour mettre en œuvre son plan de campagne de près de 3 milliards de dollars prévu selon son calendrier pour le printemps 2021. Novembre approche peu à peu et l'ombre des fake news se fait déjà sentir. So is Facebook's political ad ban taking on the wrong problem? Let's hear more from the New York Times former CEO, Mark Thompson.
On day one, did you expect that you could get it to that level of growth? And I guess more importantly, did you expect that the percentage shift from hard copies to digital would be as profound as it was?
Well, I certainly thought the potential was there. I mean, I took the job. I mean, in a weird way, you know, if they ask you to become a CEO of a company, you become a bit like an investor. The stock was about $8, and you think, well, you know, do I know better than the market? Can I see something there which the market isn't seeing? And in this case, I honestly thought this is a world-beating brand. They haven't destroyed their newsroom in the way so many others have. All we have to do is fix the way of getting this great journalism in front of people, and we can build a big business. And I'd started talking to Reed Hastings back in the early 2000s about what he was doing in entertainment. I didn't see why we couldn't do it as well. So I couldn't have put a number on it, but I really did walk in thinking, if we can only figure out a way of unlocking it, there's real potential there.
Well, to your point about the share price, Mark, I hope some of your pay packet each year has been in equity rather than just cash. In terms of the other kind of point that Sarah mentioned as well, you know, when you were Director General of the BBC, clearly impartiality wasn't just something you cared about passionately, it was something that was dictated to you by the government and by the regulators. Did you find it hard to pivot to running a company that in print in the US, print in the UK is the same, didn't have that regulator over the top enforcing impartiality? Did that grate to your inner bones about impartial journalism? Or do you refute the accusation that some people have that the New York Times is slightly partial?
Sure. So you'll know, Wilf, that my job at the Times was chief executive, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have any editorial responsibility. By the way, it feels rather nice not having editorial responsibility. But of course, I'm a passionate supporter of the Times. The Times doesn't have the formal obligation to impartiality that the BBC does. It's got, in its news pages, still a very deep commitment to trying to be objective in its news pages. Its opinion pages are different. Its editorials for many years have on balance left, and it certainly has a slight preponderance of liberal voices in its opinion pages. But there's a real commitment to objectivity. But in very polarized times, you know, many people, when they talk about wanting impartial journalism, they actually mean journalism which agrees with their worldview. To the impartial looks partial. And I think what we're seeing and the kind of noise around impartiality has got more to do with the growing splits and the growing polarization of American political discourse, much more to do with that than I think it actually has to do with the New York Times as such.
Le blocage par Facebook de nouvelles publicités politiques pourrait échouer, selon lui. Il existe encore de nombreuses manières dont la désinformation des électeurs peut se répandre sur le réseau social. Selon l'ancien PDG du New York Times, les publicités politiques sur Facebook ne sont qu'un élément du contenu sur le réseau social. La désinformation politique se développe également dans les messages que les gens publient et dans les discussions des groupes Facebook privés. And the latest job report, however, could be a strong argument for President Donald Trump as he stumps for votes. L'économie américaine a créé 1,4 million d'emplois en août et le taux de chômage est tombé en dessous de 10%. CNBC's Steve Leismans joins the discussion.
Well, thanks very much, Fed Chair Jerome Powell, in an interview with National Public Radio, saying that the jobs report is better than he expected it to be, being the second Fed official to comment on. The first one was Eric Rosengrant on CNBC earlier today. But he says it could take years before the economy is fully recovered. He says low interest rates are here for an extended period of time. And he says that there are enormous economic gains from people wearing masks. And I'll give you one quote here from the article that NPR wrote about the interview. "We think the economy is going to need low interest rates, which supports economic activity for an extended period of time. It will be measured in years," he said. Sarah, as you know, we have a bit of a split going on between Fed officials who are signaling that something's going to happen imminently in terms of QE and outcome-based guidance in September. Others say it's not needed. Eric Rosengren on air this morning became the first to say he wasn't in any particular hurry to provide any additional assistance. Governor Brainerd and one other person has also suggested maybe we want it could come as soon as September. Evans yesterday kind of joined Brainerd. So Powell doesn't seem to be saying, I don't know if he was asked, we'll be reading the full transcript, as to whether or not he thinks something ought to happen relatively soon in terms of additional Fed support for the economy.
Le président de la Fed affirme que le rapport sur l'emploi est meilleur que prévu, mais que la reprise économique pourrait prendre des années. La hausse du nombre d'emplois en août est attribuable à l'embauche de nouveaux fonctionnaires, soit 238 000 nouveaux postes. And one company that is definitely not firing these days, it's obviously Amazon. Amazon annonce son intention d'ajouter 10 000 emplois supplémentaires. Les détails de CNBC.
A news flash from Amazon announcing plans to add 10,000 more jobs. This is in addition to the 15,000 that they announced in February for their location in Bellevue. Pretty interesting blog post here, Sarah. In addition to the new roles, an additional 2 million square feet of office space in downtown Bellevue by leasing some new iconic properties they add. So between the FedEx hiring, 27% increase in seasonal hiring year on year, and now Amazon, I mean, shipping goods around the country is going to be a big source of employment this fall.
That's exactly what Diane just said. Look for the job gains to be added this holiday season in e-commerce. And there's very little visibility in terms of what demand is going to look like for the holiday season. That's been a recurrent theme in some of the retail earnings we've seen this week, Carl. But one thing is for sure, Kayla, and that is they are expecting it to come from online. Signet Jewelers, which is the quintessential mall-based retailer. They own Jared's and Zales. They're all over the malls. She told me yesterday, Jenna Drosos, the CEO, that they're increasing their online throughput by 5 times for the holiday season. That's the most they could see into the future as to what's coming. And this Amazon job announcement just sort of proves the point.
Ces nouveaux emplois s'ajoutent aux 15 000 nouveaux postes annoncés par Amazon en février. Amazon est actuellement en train de construire plusieurs bureaux dans la banlieue de Seattle. Et l'annonce qui pourrait faire changer l'industrie du cinéma. Disney's Mulan debuts on its streaming service this weekend. La sortie de Mulan sur une plateforme de streaming serait un nouveau moyen de monétiser les nouveaux films. Let's see how 2020 is changing the movie industry for good.
Welcome to Trading Nation. I'm Seema Modi. Disney debuting its live-action blockbuster Mulan this Labor Day weekend on its Disney Plus streaming platform. The film will be available for a premium price months after its expected premiere back in March. Disney looking for another streaming smash hit after Hamilton earlier this summer. The stock surging this quarter, but still more than 14% off its highs set in November. Will another smash prove a turning point for the beaten-down name? Let's bring in Matt Milley, a Miller Tabak, Gina Sanchez of Chantico Global. Gina, how big of a moment of truth is this for Disney, or is the market sort of getting too excited about this release of Mulan?
Well, if you look at the Disney Plus streaming service, they launched in November with 10 million subscribers and an aspirational goal of 60 million by 2024. They hit that goal this month in early August, 60.5 million subscribers. And so I think Disney did the math and said, I think we can monetize this during the pandemic where we are unable to monetize other aspects of our very strong brand value. So this makes sense. And I think that this could be a very valuable move for Disney and also to flex the muscle of their Disney Plus streaming channel and just the brand value that's locked in there.
Matt, the only area of growth really seems to be streaming, because then you have sports, which is dealing with its own uncertainty, parks as well. So where does the stock stand here in comparison to where it was at when the economy was going here?
Well, you know, it's funny, as you said, the stock's been lagging badly. It's nowhere near its September highs like the market is and many stocks have been able to achieve. However, the stock actually hasn't been acting all that badly, just in a more gradual fashion, in a weird way when you look at the chart. And one of the good things that could take place in the next week or two is that it would see a golden cross with the 50-day moving average moving above its 200-day moving average. 2 out of the last 3 times that has happened, the stock has rallied dramatically after that's taken place. And the third time, it didn't go down. It just didn't rally quite as dramatically. It still went up about 5% over the next month. So either way, it was a positive move. But more importantly, as I mentioned, even though it hasn't been as aggressive in its rally as a lot of other stocks, it has still been making a series of higher lows and higher highs and a nice upward sloping trend channel.
Le film de Mulan a coûté plus de 200 millions de dollars à réaliser. Les studios espèrent au moins récupérer une partie de ces coûts au box-office. Je vous le rappelle, Disney a publié Mulan sur Disney Plus pour 30 $, un coût supplémentaire de l'abonnement habituel. Les amateurs de jeux vidéo seront ravis de l'apprendre. Nintendo announced remastered versions of Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine and Super Mario Galaxy on Nintendo Switch. Nintendo célèbre le 35e anniversaire de la sortie originale de Super Mario Bros. Reportage de la rédaction de CNBC.
It's me, Mario!
Les remakes classiques devraient générer un buzz indispensable pour Nintendo à l'approche des fêtes de fin d'année. Les jeux seront regroupés dans un package que Nintendo appellera Super Mario 3D All Stars et sortira au prix de 59,99 € sur une période limitée du 18 septembre au 31 mars 2021. Et les actions de Nintendo ont augmenté de 36% depuis le début de l'année. Merci à tous d'avoir suivi la première partie de ce journal. On marque désormais une courte pause. On se retrouve dans quelques minutes pour une édition spéciale coronavirus. We'll come back in a few minutes.
I think in this crisis, Europe really came together fairly quickly, decided fast. We had the first package agreed in the Eurogroup, Euro area finance ministers, already in May, adding up to 540 billion euro. So quick reaction, big volume, well coordinated also between the European institutions, including the European Central Bank, Commission, ESM, national governments. And then in July, of course, we had the big decision in the European Council on the next generation EU. So all that together is really big money. And I also hear this in the markets again and again, that many people in the markets tell me we are more positive on Europe than the last 10 years ever because of the quick reaction, the big volume of money and the good coordination.
We've lived through many crises over the last 20, 30 years in Europe, and of course since the creation of the Eurozone as well. I'm surprised at how quick Europe got its act together. I'm surprised at the coordination. I'm surprised Italy looks like it's back in the fold. But it doesn't matter what I think. Are you?
Yeah, no. But I think one thing to understand is that this crisis is really different from the other crises. We had the euro crisis 8-10 years ago, a few years before that, the global financial crisis, and then a few dot-com bubbles burst and all of that. So you're right, many crises. But this is a different type of crisis. It was a symmetric shock hitting every European country. We can say every country in the world. That was something unprecedented. That's also why the economic damage is the worst in our lifetime. Very different. When I compared with the euro crisis, there it was 4 or 5 countries that were affected because they had implemented wrong policies for a number of years and there had to be corrections. They lost market access. So it was quite dramatic for a few countries and the others had to organize how to help them. It was new. This time, I think everybody understood we are all affected. We are all in this together. We all have to get out of it because we want to preserve the single market of the European Union and we have to make sure monetary union works well. That's why there is this unprecedented degree of solidarity.
Une crise qui ne ressemble à aucune autre. Voilà les mots de Klaus Regling. Selon lui, l'Europe s'est rapidement réunie pour réagir à la crise de la Covid-19. Et une autre interview phare de ce forum, l'ancien directeur du FMI, Carlo Cottarelli. He discussed with CNBC how the European agreement to provide an unprecedented stimulus is changing Italy. Let's listen.
What has happened in Italy over the last few months? We know that it went first into COVID very hard, a devastating loss of over 35,000 people. But now Italy seems to have basically refound itself in Europe.
Yes, certainly this is true. First of all, it helped a lot the money that is coming from the European institutions. First and foremost, this year, the money from the European Central Bank. And also the prospect that next year there will be the money from the Next Generation EU, the Recovery Fund. But also after the very severe lockdown in March and April, Italy was reopened. So the lockdown was severe, but it did not last as much as in other countries. And this explains, in my view, why already in May and June you see some rebound. The summer is not going very well in terms of tourism, in terms of foreign tourism. But domestic Italians usually go abroad. This year they remain in Italy, so it helped.
I did something for that. I have been to Italy on my holidays with my family this year, so this foreign tourist did make it down to the south, I can assure you. And it was, no, thank you, it was fantastic. But there is a problem. Tourism's down enormously as well. Unemployment is steady around 10%, but it's still much worse than many people want it to be. There are problems with the deficit as well, again, around circa 10% as well. And the debts have picked up naturally from the very high 135 to an even higher 155, maybe 160% of GDP as well. The fundamentals look bad for the Italian economy still.
Yeah, indeed. I am worried about the medium term. So far, so good. So far, so good. I mean, so far is better than expected. We have to see in the medium term. What is going to be critical is whether Italy now takes this as an opportunity to introduce the reforms that are long overdue. Infrastructure is one, digital infrastructure, more investment in human capital, research, schools, something that has been missing. The reform of the bureaucracy, which is red tape, is terrible in Italy. The reform of the justice system, all these things are needed to make sure that Italy restarts. It's not just a rebound from the bottom, but we start growing much faster than in the last 10 years.
That sounds great. But you and I probably had this same conversation pre-COVID. I certainly had this conversation with many of the other guests here for 10 years, Carlo. Ever since the great financial crisis, you could have turned around and said, reform the justice system, reform the bureaucracy. Why is it going to happen now?
There is one difference, that now we can rely on the money coming from Europe. And that money, however, is going to come only if reforms are implemented.
C'est la dernière chance pour l'Italie et pour l'Europe, dit-il. Certains pays de l'UE ont critiqué l'Italie ces dernières années pour ne pas avoir mis à jour ses politiques du marché du travail, ni réduire la bureaucratie et d'autres réformes indispensables. Mais certains économistes, comme Carlo Cottarelli, estiment que les fonds de relance européens peuvent inverser cette tendance. L'Union européenne serait-elle le nouvel allié de la Chine? Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs Luigi Di Maio was also at the forum this weekend. He discusses Italy's ties to China during the COVID-19 pandemic.
It's been an opportunity for Italy to remember how many nations are Italy's friend. During the most difficult part of the pandemic, when Italy needed support, both in terms of medical supplies and support, in that moment we understood that Italy must continue to reinforce multilateralism because it is essential for the future of our relations.
You mentioned the medical equipment. I'm presuming straight away you're talking about that very important relationship with Europe and China as well. It's a very difficult conundrum for various reasons. One, you want to hold China to account for human rights issues, for Hong Kong, but at the same time you want to be a partner. Is Europe going to be able to negotiate its own path regardless of where the US goes?
It's important to me that I mention that we receive support from all over the world, even supplies of medical equipment we bought from China like everyone else, but also from other countries. So the issue of our geopolitical alliances is not in discussion. Italy is firmly placed in the Euro-Atlantic alliance and an ally and friend of the US. The purchases of medical equipment during the pandemic does not change their relationships and alliances. In fact, it reinforces our friendship with the US. I thank President Trump for having approved $100 million in aid for Italy during the pandemic.
In terms of that very difficult relationship with both of those parties, though, let's concentrate first, if we can, on China. Countries all over Europe and the world are making decisions on Chinese equipment in infrastructure going forward, in 5G to be specific, and the role of Huawei. When will you and the government have made your decision on Huawei? There have been reports that Huawei will be excluded from 5G development in Italy.
I fully agree with our allies, especially the US's concerns regarding the safety of 5G technology and our tech infrastructure. Italy, with our 3 regulatory measures, understands the US's concerns on the safety of cyber networks and infrastructures.
L'Italie refuse de se mêler à la dispute sino-américaine. Le pays souhaite renforcer davantage ses liens avec les deux puissances. Je vous le rappelle, le ministre chinois des Affaires étrangères, Wang Yi, a entamé une tournée européenne en commençant par Rome. Et la course au vaccin continue évidemment, les bonnes nouvelles se succèdent, mais l'OMS souhaite calmer les ardeurs de certains pays. According to the WHO, widespread coronavirus vaccinations are not expected until mid-2021. Let's hear more on CNBC.
In terms of realistic timelines, we're really not expecting to see widespread vaccination until the middle of next year. This phase 3 must take longer because you need to see how truly protective the vaccine is. You also need to see how safe it is. You need to understand whether there are things that there are earlier phases you do look at safety, and you look at safety very, very carefully before you go into the phase 3. But you need to be following safety at all stages. So that makes it a longer process.
L'OMS souligne l'importance de contrôles rigoureux afin de vérifier l'efficacité et surtout la sécurité des vaccins. L'Organisation mondiale de la santé ne s'attend pas à des vaccinations généralisées contre la Covid-19 avant le milieu de l'année prochaine. Et on en parlait dans nos éditions précédentes, certains pays essaient de contourner les consignes de l'OMS sur le vaccin. Les États-Unis, eux, se précipitent sur l'achat de doses. UK and the US are now considering approving the Russian vaccine.
We had lots of interest in Russian vaccine and publication in The Lancet, which is one of the key Western magazines on medicine. It's very important to share information about Russian vaccine with the world. And the results have been very good. So basically the study showed that there is very strong both antibody and cell immune response. 100% of the people developed very strong antibody level, 1.5 times on average the level of a sick COVID patient. And cell response has also been very strong, which augurs very well for good long-term immunity. There were no significant side effects. The article also mentions the advantage of the human adenovirus vector that Russia used, which has been basically studied for the last decades and has been a very safe, proven approach. And it also mentions the benefit of having 2 shots with 2 different vectors and 2 different vectors generated much better response than 1 shot or 2 shots with the same vector.
Now, this data, this is from your phase 1-2 clinical trials, and you've got a phase 3 trial underway now. When can we expect to get data from the phase 3 clinical trials that are going on now with humans?
So phase 3 first results, I think, will release at the end of October. Right now, we have 40,000 clinical trials that is going on Russia. We started it at the end of August, and there will also be clinical trials in UAE, Saudi Arabia, Philippines, and many other markets. So basically, we are on track to have registration not only available in Russia, and right now people in Russia are being vaccinated, but also available to key other countries already around November.
And on that point, Russia has decided to go ahead with domestic regulatory approval for this vaccine just 2 months after you began testing it on humans. And a lot of people in the medical community have looked at this with a bit of scrutiny and are skeptical about the decision to go ahead before we have this robust phase 3 data. What has given you the confidence in the vaccine's safety and efficacy?
Juliana, that's a great question. And basically the advantage Russia had, it had already a registered Ebola vaccine that went through all clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and we just slightly modified this Ebola vaccine based on human adenovirus to this COVID vaccine. So this is an approach called human adenovirus, has been studied a lot. From 1971, all of the recruits in the US military are receiving human adenovirus vaccine. So we used an all-proven approach. We made it happen. And now other countries follow in our footsteps. You saw Britain last Friday saying that maybe they'll consider emergency authorization. FDA said they may want to consider emergency authorization. So really following Russian footsteps after initially saying no way that any vaccine can ever be approved before phase 3. We believe we have a very safe technology. We want to make it available to our high-risk personnel, and they want it.
Le vaccin russe s'appellera Sputnik V, d'après le programme spatial de l'ère soviétique. Selon la revue scientifique internationale The Lancet, l'approbation du vaccin à l'international est prématurée. Pour l'instant, le vaccin n'a même pas commencé les essais de la phase 3 et aucun résultat des essais de stade antérieurs n'avait été publié. Fin septembre, le financement du gouvernement fédéral américain s'épuise, à moins que le Congrès n'agisse au plus vite. Le pays s'expose au risque de fermeture du gouvernement pendant une crise sanitaire, mais Mike Pence fait des révélations déconcertantes sur l'antenne de CNBC. Un deal informel serait en cours.
You mentioned the impact of the programs in the prior relief bill and the benefit that that provided the economy in getting a lot of these businesses to add people onto their payrolls. We learned yesterday that the Democrats plan to pursue separately a bill to fund the government and a bill to provide relief. A, will the president sign a short-term bill to fund the government beyond September? And B, will the president, what is the prognosis for a relief bill if those two things cannot be combined?
You know, from very early in this pandemic, President Trump made it clear that not only were we going to marshal the full resources of the federal government, the full resources of our economy to meet this moment, to put the health of America first, but he also said we're going to spare no expense to help families and businesses large and small weather the storm of the coronavirus pandemic. And at this point, we've seen more than $4 trillion made available. The agreement reached this week by the Treasury Secretary and our negotiations team to have a continuing resolution to continue to fund the government when the fiscal year runs out at the end of this month means that now we can focus just on another relief bill. And we're continuing to do that in good faith. Look, nobody wants to give direct payments to American families more than President Donald Trump again. I mean, we sent those checks to American families. It helped people through this tough time. We want to continue the Paycheck Protection Program, which we think laid a foundation for many of the Americans that are coming off the sidelines, going back to work. We were able to preserve those job opportunities precisely because this president negotiated the Paycheck Protection Program. Those are vital programs. We want them to continue. But what we've made clear is we're not going to allow Democrats in Congress to use a coronavirus relief bill to bail out poorly run Democrat states in the country.
L'administration Trump et le Congrès ont convenu d'un plan pour éviter la fermeture du gouvernement sans toucher au financement du plan sur le coronavirus. Cette décision nous montre que l'impasse sur le montant d'argent à investir dans la relance de l'économie pourrait persister. Je vous le rappelle, les démocrates et les républicains du Congrès peinent à s'accorder sur le montant des fonds. Les démocrates poussent actuellement l'administration Trump à augmenter le montant de leur offre de relance à au moins 2,2 milliards de dollars contre environ 1,3 milliard de dollars proposés actuellement par les républicains. And the tech giants are what all leaders are talking about these days. Speaking at the European House Ambrosetti Forum, Paolo Gentiloni, European Commissioner for Economics and Taxation, says they are the real winners of this crisis. Let's listen to his interview on CNBC.
It is a major problem, also because we all know that the giants of the digital platforms are the real winners of this crisis from the economical point of view. And we all experience this in our own lives. So it's normal and it is positive that we have these technology advanced means. But it is not no more possible to accept the idea that those giants, the winners of the crisis, are not paying a fair amount of taxes in Europe. And we can't manage this problem with a single digital taxation in UK, in Italy, in Spain, in France, in Czechia, etc., etc. We need, at least at the European Union level, a general measure. We hope that this can be reached at a global level. You are right that we have difficulty in the OECD /G20 discussion, but we made also progress. So we will see in the next week if something is possible.
Is there progress, sir? Because my understanding was the US was showing less interest in that now than when I was at Chantilly and Biarritz last year.
Well, we are in an electoral year in US, and I think that this also has an influence, obviously. It's not easy, I understand.
It's become a political tool, hasn't it?
Yes. It's not easy to take a decision in such a delicate issue in these weeks. But technically progress were made in this OECD process, both on the minimal corporate taxation and on digital taxation. Now the US are pushing to go forward on the minimal corporate and to calm down on the digital. I think that we have to insist on the necessity of a global solution. It's better also for the companies.
Je vous le rappelle, les États-Unis et l'Union européenne ne sont pas d'accord sur l'imposition d'entreprises telles qu'Apple, Alphabet et Amazon. En 2018, la Commission européenne a proposé une taxe numérique de 3%. Les GAFA doivent payer un bon montant d'impôts en Europe, d'autant plus qu'ils sont les vrais gagnants de la crise des coronavirus, dit-il. Et notre grand format du jour, How Coronavirus Could Usher in a New Age of Automation. Les États-Unis continuent d'accélérer l'automatisation de certaines tâches et de certains emplois. Décryptage de la rédaction de CNBC.
Automation is coming for your job. At least that's the fear among many workers. From burger-flipping bots to car-building robots, not to mention high-powered software taking on more and more administrative tasks, it seems like hundreds of skills are rapidly becoming obsolete in the US economy. A McKinsey study found that AI and deep learning could add as much as $3.5 trillion to $5.8 trillion in annual value to companies.
80% or more of the jobs that make $20 an hour or less are at least potentially subject to automation.
The economic shock of the pandemic hasn't helped. Human workers are vulnerable to diseases that robots aren't, making it much easier and now cheaper to have a robot on staff that doesn't require healthcare.
Businesses are kind of looking and seeing that humans can get sick from COVID, but machines can't.
You can eliminate the healthcare costs, the labor and wage
tag that comes along with those folks, and particularly in services, that's a big competitive advantage.
To put the increase in robotics in perspective, the US had 0.49 robots per 1,000 workers in 1995, which rose to 1.79 robots per 1,000 workers in 2017. But automation isn't just a robotics revolution. The rise in information technology and artificial intelligence, or AI, has also become an enabler of automation. AI can help navigate difficult challenges that previously only a human operator could handle. Of course, if you've encountered automated phone systems, it's likely you personally experienced that automation still has a long way to go.
There is nothing wrong with automation as long as it is part of a portfolio of technological changes, but its specific effects are not super good for labor.
But the pace of technological change is accelerating, and the COVID-19 pandemic could have acted as the accelerant. The Urban Institute estimates more than 8 million low-income jobs have been lost during the pandemic.
One of the reasons we have friction in our labor force is that when people get laid off, they have a harder time finding a new job, and that's been especially true in the last 20 years.
High-skilled jobs such as finance managers, payroll managers, and accounting roles face a 56% chance of being automated in the future. And according to Consulting.ca, up to 30% of oil and gas jobs could be lost to automation by 2040. One major problem in the US for workers is that workers are a tax burden for employers, whereas machines are actually subsidized.
US tax code has been very automation friendly. The United States has always taxed capital more lightly than labor.
I think the government's going to have to be more aggressive going forward than just simply relying on a growing economy.
Automation was progressing before the pandemic hit, but the sudden financial pressure that businesses in the US encountered created the perfect storm to turn to automation. In previous recessions, enterprises looking to streamline their business practices turned to automation, and in some cases, the recession simply sped up what was already a long-desired change.
The conventional wisdom about the pandemic is that it has greatly accelerated all kinds of trends. AI, artificial intelligence, robotics and things like that, the movement toward those is certainly going to be accelerated post-pandemic for a simple reason. Robots don't get sick.
In food service industries, industrial machines that helped with food packaging, preparation, or even serving have helped to ease the burden on human employees who are susceptible to disease. Companies are looking to vaccinate their supply chains to make them more efficient. Automation of processes helps to eliminate the need for more administrative staff, and a less human labor-reliant warehouse system means that when a coworker calls in sick, half the office isn't quarantined.
Among those who are actually employed in some of these low-wage occupations in the future, there'll be downward pressure on their wages, right? Because they'll be competing with machines, and so I think there will be some competition there.
If we're not able to retrain people for new things, then the historical pattern has been that the people that benefit the most from automation are people that have IT skills. In a post-pandemic world, if you don't have some IT skills, you're at greater risk of being disrupted and having your wages fall relative to other people.
Both the Trump administration and the Biden campaign have proposals to advance job gains for workers that have become affected at least in part by automation.
Whether your predictions are true about automation and self-driving trucks, these folks aren't stupid. They listen, they understand, and they're scared to death.
The Biden campaign has proposed making community college free and also providing money for apprenticeships. The Trump administration has advocated more money for apprenticeships and so forth. But I think as a society, the need to help people transition to new jobs is going to be much greater in the post-pandemic world than the one that existed just 6 months ago.
The key to a post-pandemic world is a vaccine for COVID-19. Recent vaccine candidates have continued forward in clinical trials, and there is hope that if the US can field a vaccine quick enough, the economic recovery could slow down some automation trends that have spiked due to the outbreak.
But I don't think enough thought has been given to how to get enough people, and I think it may take as many as 80%, enough people in the population to take the vaccine so that we can get herd immunity and get our economy back to normal. And then these trends that we're talking about, the AI trends and automation, they'll kick in later, but we need to get back to normal before we even get to the so-called longer-term trends.
the clock can't be turned back on technological advancement. AI research is steadily increasing, and U.S. investment ranged between $15 billion to $23 billion in 2016 alone.
In the long run, better productivity leads to more economic growth, leads to higher wages for everybody. So there's really no doubt in the long run, automation, the story of it for the past 300 years has been a happy one. In the short run, for workers who are displaced, we generally don't see wages recover, certainly not quickly. We see more effects transmitted to their families as well, more problems finishing school or behavioral issues.
According to a Deloitte study, 50% of all jobs are potentially open to automation in the coming decades. And according to McKinsey, 400 million workers could be replaced by automation by 2030, which is about 15% of the global workforce. Automation isn't all doom and gloom. Some are hopeful that if automation takes over lower-skilled tasks, it could open up opportunities for fewer work hours and more free time that could be focused on creative pursuits that could actually result in even more economic growth.
There's certainly ways that the government can kind of step in and actually support the reskilling of workers who've lost their jobs, right? They can form public-private partnerships, support people going back to school, or investing in more specialized skill sets within industries, help them move across industries from areas that have been hit hard by the pandemic to sort of more emerging areas. So that's one set of policies. The other set of policies is to actually provide incentives for firms to actually do a lot of this work themselves.
Well, in general, automation is important because it brings higher productivity to workers, and it allows us to do more at a lower cost. And so in general, on average, it's going to be a great boon to us. The challenge, I think, is during the transition, both for individual workers and the communities in which they live, you could see some disruption from this, particularly, I think, among lower income or less well-trained workers who have fewer skills to transition in an automated environment.
One proposal to help offset job loss from automation is the concept of universal basic income, or UBI.
The freedom dividend makes the case to our fellow Americans that we all have intrinsic value as people, as citizens, as human beings.
Some UBI plans include a roughly $1,000 monthly payment to every adult in the country with no strings attached. Detractors have argued that UBI would cause a drop in economic activity because it would disincentivize work. Other arguments contend that it is not feasible financially for the US government to dole out large sums of money to such an extreme number of citizens.
We've done sort of a temporary UBI in the course of this pandemic. We sent out the $1,200 check, and as we talk now, Congress is debating whether to send out another one. I don't think that's permanently sustainable from a fiscal point of view.
Finland recently ran a UBI study and concluded that it did not create a disincentive for citizens to work. The study compared 2,000 people on UBI versus 173,000 on unemployment benefits over a 2-year period. People who were on UBI reported feeling better mentally about their well-being compared to those on unemployment benefits. Researchers also noticed that those on UBI saw a higher increase in employment, but remained unsure on the causes behind that trend.
I think handing out money to everyone, regardless of their circumstances, is simply going to cost too much, especially in the light of all the additional debt that we've taken on.
And we might get a better bang for our buck than just giving out checks every month to people who haven't lost their jobs, because there's also externality effects associated with that, right? Most people, I think, want to work, they want to build human capital, and that's building our productive base going into the future. So as a short-term static issue, like during the pandemic, yeah, I'm fine with that. Having a short-run sort of universal basic income because people can't work because of the pandemic makes sense. I'm not sure yet. I don't think the evidence is quite in that this is a very viable long-term strategy relative to some of the other ways that we could invest that money.
Des machines à retourner les hamburgers, aux robots de construction de voitures, en passant par les logiciels de haute puissance qui assument de plus en plus de tâches administratives. Des centaines de compétences deviennent rapidement obsolètes dans l'économie américaine. Une étude de McKinsey a révélé que l'intelligence artificielle pourrait ajouter jusqu'à 3,5 milliards de dollars à 5,8 milliards de dollars en valeur annuelle pour les entreprises. Thank you all for being with us. Merci à tous d'avoir participé à ce format 100% hybride. See you very soon for the rest of international news.